First of all, start out, history can be short, and Palm Coast and Flagler County have relatively short histories. And I've got a little story anecdote to kind of put it in perspective. My daughter, some years ago, when I was much younger, signed up for a history course. And I've always been a history wonk. And I asked her, I said, Meg, what period of history are you studying in this class? And she said, we're studying the period from the Second World War and up to the present. I have a feeling that most of the people on this call have pretty much been there that whole time. I know I have. But Flagler County was really just started in 1917, so it's got a short history. And the city of Palm Coast began at towards the end of the 1960s in the planning stages, didn't become a city until 1999. And so its history is even shorter. But think about this, that arguably the youngest city in the country is a half-hour drive down the road from the oldest continuously occupied city in North America. And I just, that juxtaposition is, I think most people don't think about that. I think it's pretty spectacular and astounding. Okay, but being a young city, we've got certain advantages. We've had zoning from the beginning. It was a master plan community. And a lot of people, when you say master plan community, they think about Grand Haven, Palm Coast Plantation, Hammock Dunes, Hammock Beach. But Palm Coast was a planned community. And that's why we have such rigid codes about color, for instance. You can't get a building permit in Palm Coast unless you have already picked out a color that's in their preferred palette of colors. And you have to have very strict architectural standards, roof pitch, detailing on the front. You can't just have a flat front door. You've got to have a portico, a little roof to come. You've got to have banding around the house, around the windows. So it's always been really a master plan community. Conformity is an advantage to some people. Architecture, signage, landscaping are all fairly uniform. And in our case in Palm Coast, most of us think very, very attractive. But residential, commercial, and industrial areas have been planned ahead of time. So we have areas that have been set aside to be, well, Town Center was set aside to be ultimately a commercial center. We have the industrial area up where Palm Coast Data was. We have Hargrove Grade. We don't have industrial things interspersed among residential things. So we've really ended up with a very beautiful city. We just don't have anything except monument signs. We don't have an International Speedway Boulevard. And every city, any city that you all came from, has an International Speedway Boulevard or equivalent, or several of them. We don't. If you drive over, I'm always struck when I drive over the toll bridge headed west. Just stop if there's not much traffic, pull off to the right-hand lane and just look out to the west. There are almost 90,000 residents out there, and all you see is a tree canopy. It's pretty remarkable. Another thing that's unique because we're young is that all of our arterial roads, like Belterre, was able to be widened because the right-of-way was already there. It was laid out originally when the city was planned. And that's important to us going forward because when you have to widen a road, anywhere from 50% of the cost to 400% of the actual construction cost is land acquisition, right-of-way acquisition. So we have a huge advantage there going forward because we already own those rights of way or right-of-ways, whichever is correct. And more than half of our housing stock is new. It's built to the post Hurricane Andrew building codes. And that's very significant, not only if you live in one, but if you're here looking for a home to buy. So on the plus side, residential neighborhoods are off the actual arterial roads. We're really a cul-de-sac neighborhood. You don't, some people would argue that Florida Park Drive is an arterial road. The people on Florida Park Drive seem to think so. And I can understand why, because I drive that road quite a bit. It's my way to Publix. But by and large, we don't have people backing out onto high traffic road areas, which is very, very nice. Makes for a very pleasant residential neighborhood, makes for easier access to the street in and out. But it doesn't lend itself, that kind of planning does not lend itself to public transportation. If you think about buses going up and down Belterre, traditional buses, as they do in a typical grid work city layout where you have streets and avenues, and you may have bus routes on every 10th street or avenue. Think about living back in the bowels of the P section. Some of those places, it's a two-mile walk out to Belterre, to a bus stop. So laid out the way we are, we will never have a traditional public transportation system. Fortunately, because of technology, we'll probably solve that problem with autonomous vehicles. Think about Uber cars without an Uber driver. And think about them being owned by the city transportation department or the county transportation department. Instead of having a large bus with mostly empty seats, you'll have a average sized car that could be pretty much occupied 50% or more all the time. We don't have pre-existing conditions where you have grandfathered strip parlors, stripping parlors, or adult entertainment, or heavy industrial. The only close thing to it would be arguably the C-Ray plant, which is down near Lambert Avenue, which is a residential street. But when C-Ray was built, there was only one house on Lambert Avenue. So you could argue that it became residential after the industrial component was put in. Our city was planned with swales and ditches and canals as a stormwater management system. And it's really quite a unique system. It's fairly uncommon. And it's unique because it's very, very efficient. The roads themselves are part of the stormwater management system. The roads fill up with water because they're supposed to, because the roads can carry an awful lot of water, and the roads are all below the level of the homes. The stormwater management system of swales is also less expensive to put in. And of course, when Palm Coast was designed, they had to put in their infrastructure first. So they did it very cheaply with the swale system. But the downside of swales is that there are no sidewalks. No, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. We have consistent architectural styling and landscaping. It's one community, the F section looks like the C section, which looks like the P section. And we have some areas that are, obviously being on a saltwater canal is more desirable than not being on a saltwater canal. But our communities are fairly homogeneous. Again, I talked earlier about signage. It doesn't dominate. Traffic is not a real issue because the roads were well laid out and well planned. And I know that I'll get pushback on that comment, but you need to get out of town more often if you think that, because stopping, having to sit through 2 cycles at a traffic light does not constitute a traffic jam. You need to go to Atlanta or New York City or Boston or some of the other towns to appreciate that. So some of the minuses of our system is that, as I said, we don't have sidewalks, and Palm Coast is one of the least walkable cities in Florida. And there's actually a walkability score website that rates cities, and I think it's a scale of 1 to 100, and I think we're pretty much single digit. Only about 5% of our residents can walk to a bar or a restaurant or grocery store from their home. We have 130 miles or more of beautiful trail system in the city and the county. And these are nice trails. They're most of them 10 feet wide. So you can bicycle, you can jog, walk all with other people who are doing those other, so it's multi-use. But unfortunately, most of us have to get in a car to drive to them. And when you think about that, that's really kind of stupid. We drive to the trail system and then we walk out and walk back, or bike out and bike back. We don't walk to work. We don't walk to shop. So it's round trip walking and jogging rather than point to point walking and jogging. And the way we're laid out, that's after you can't do that after the fact. Suburban sprawl, suburban sprawl is counter environmental. I did a report on Go Toby about a year and a half ago that talked about IT&T has their original plan outlived its usefulness. And I talk about suburban sprawl. And then more recently, I did an article about density from a conservationist standpoint and how Flagler County will look in the future. And they cite it's called Florida 2070 project, I believe it's called. And what they do is they show a heat map of the area of the entire state of Florida, and then they do it county by county or region by region. And the heat map shows red where we have higher density from development, and green where we have conservation and agriculture. And then it shows what we're going to look like 50 years from now if we don't change our density rules right now, our suburban sprawl planning the way we're doing it right now. Most of Flagler County will be red. And if we just increase density by 20% and concentrate our density along the existing service corridors where we already have roads and streets, we'll do much better. And the western side of the county stays red. Lack of organic growth leads to monotony, which some people would say is boring. So I know a lot of people love Flagler County or Palm Coast particularly because it is homogeneous. Other people like Flagler Beach because Flagler Beach is more iconic. I'm not sure anybody would ever say Palm Coast is iconic, but you couldn't recreate Flagler Beach with today's zoning. Retirement community without a strong commercial real estate component, it's not really economically viable in the long run because our real estate taxes would be too high in the end. So what defines Palm Coast and Flagler County, and understanding how we started, how we got to where we are now, and to some extent where we're going in the future, is determined by these points. One is we are a bunch of seniors. 31.2% of Flagler County residents are 65 or older. And that compares to 28% in Palm Coast, only 20.9% in Florida. Most people would think that that would be higher because Florida is thought of as being a retirement state. The national average is 16.5%. So that means that we're double the national average. We have fewer juniors. We have more deaths than we have births. Our home ownership rate is higher than the national average, but our education level is lower if you use the standard of what percentage of the population is bachelor's degree or higher. We're below the national average in that regard. And that reflects back to, excuse me, That reflects back to IT&T's original marketing plan was to market in the Northeast corridor to blue collar retirees. And we have a lot of people from the Metro New York area, the North Washington, Boston corridor, who are civil servants. They're government employees, retired government employees, teachers, firemen, policemen, and they have high school degrees. They had great jobs, great retirement plans. And that's why they could afford to come down here. We don't have enough economic diversity, though. And that's one of the things that led to our housing bubble. And that's, I know that that's the main thing that we want to talk about today. The housing bubble, we're really the poster child of the housing bubble. We were the fastest growing city and fastest growing county in the country for 2 years in a row. But one of the things that characterize, there's some people that are afraid that we're in a housing bubble today. And what are some of the things that characterize the last housing bubble to what's going on today? And I think it's really important to understand the difference. We had a lot of people entering the real estate investment field who were amateurs back then. And we had people who really, they were the real estate equivalent of day traders in the stock market. And real estate isn't like the stock market. The real estate market lacks liquidity. You can't just call up your broker and say, sell my house at the market now, like you can with a bunch of stock. You can call a broker and they'll list your house and it may take 6 months. And you don't get paid until you close. There was a lot of easy credit back then, and it was very easy to get 100% financing, but there were liar loans. The credit standards were very lax, and a lot of people did buy getting 100% financing. They'd get an 80% loan and a 20% loan. Well, if you think about what happens if your housing market goes down 5%, well, you're underwater suddenly. And if you don't have cash on the sideline, you're stuck because you can't sell your house because you can't show up at the closing table with that 5% differential, which you need to clear your mortgages. So we had a rampant speculation characterized the housing bubble at that time. The exit strategy for most people was to buy a home and then immediately turn around and sell it to the person behind them in line, because people actually did get in line. They lined up. There was always a sense of urgency back then. There was a disconnect between what I call the intrinsic value. If you're going to live in a house, that house has an intrinsic value. You're willing to, you're going to sit down and say, okay, here's my budget, here's my income, 30% I can put towards a house. And so that means I can afford a house up to a certain level that defines what you can buy. In the speculation arena, you weren't buying to live there. You weren't equating the cost of owning a home versus the cost of renting a home. You weren't making that kind of decision. You were just buying a house for whatever it was selling for, because you were pretty sure you could sell it for $25,000 more in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So there was no intrinsic value to the home during the run-up. There's a sense of urgency that happens in that kind of environment. And I think that's epitomized by Bobby Ginn's marketing strategy. He used to get people into his communities prior to opening them up for sale. And he'd get 400 or 500 people in, but he'd only have 100 lots to sell or 150 lots to sell. So immediately when you got to his sales events, you sense that, wow, I better try to get mine on day one because these are going to go fast. And they did. The conservatory has 340 building lots, and they sold in one weekend. And they were just little pieces of dirt then, and they sold for 300. The lowest price was $329,900. The highest price was $529,900. I looked at the last couple of months, the average price for a conservatory home was, the median price was 445,000 in that range. So basically what that means is they're reselling the conservatory lots at their original price, but now they're throwing in a free house. Think about that. That's how we've changed, how things have changed since the bubble days. Back then, the time to construct a new home was 2 years. So that put more pressure on to buy an existing home. Now here are a couple pictures I took of the front page of a Washington Post Sunday edition from June 5th, 2011. And this is above the fold in newspaper terms. So when this is lying on your doorstep, flat on your doorstep, that left-hand picture is what you saw. The right-hand picture was in between, it was inside the front page or the front section. That's European Village during its worst days. So the stages of the decline, first of all, median prices rose at an unsustainable rate. They were going up. I actually owned some rental homes in Grand Haven that were renting, well, the carrying cost was around $2,000 a month. And aside from the liquidity issue, the value of those homes was going up more than $2,000 a month. Of course, I couldn't use that added equity to pay my mortgage payment that month. That was part of the issue. The buyers were the first people to leave. And this happened a lot sooner than most people think about. Most people think about the recession as being the 07, 08, 09. And actually we saw it if you were, and I didn't see it. One of the things about real estate is you don't see it until after it's happened. Real estate is always observed through the rearview mirror. Because if I signed to sell my house today or my condo to one of you, nobody knows what the price was until we close, maybe 2 months later. So the buyers left the market, but nobody really noticed. The number of homes sold was in 2005, July 2005. And again, that's about 2 years before most people would expect. 338 homes were sold. The market momentum continued though. For the next 6 months, prices continued to rise. They rose 21% in 6 months up until December of that year. Then monthly home sales bottomed out 2.5 years later at only 53 homes in January 08. That's 84.3% below the peak. The median selling price bottomed out much later in September 2011 and January 2012, the same number at $106,000. Now remember, the peak price was $259,950. $259,950 was the peak price. The bottom price, $106,000. So that's a 59.2% decline. That was unheard of at the time, and I hope won't ever be heard of again. The bubble median price wasn't reached again until, surprisingly, the middle of the pandemic. We had an unusual dip in sales in April and May. But for some reason or other, the real estate industry has really not suffered as, say, the restaurant industry has. We've had a very good V-shaped recovery, and we'll get into the details about that. But we didn't reach the peak selling prices from the bubble until June of this last year. And the V-shaped recovery, by the way, is so strong that we've stayed above that level every month since and continue above it right now. In 2009, 2010, 2011, 52% or more of all single-family homes sold in Flagler County through the, this is all of the time I'm talking tonight, I'm talking using MLS data. So it's not taking into account direct sales from builders or sales by owner. We also had, not only had we been the fastest growing city and county, we were the highest unemployment rate in the state at the depth. Now, this is an interesting chart. This shows you, I'm going to show you the highlights of what we just went through. This is June 2005. That's the peak of the home sales. And look at where the price was. The price is the blue line, home sales is red. See where the price line was at the time home sales hit their peak? Prices didn't peak until 6 months later. But look how home sales plummeted. But it took a long time for people to notice. That's called market momentum. Then down here shows the bottom of the market from a home sales standpoint, but prices were still not bad. They were slightly below what they'd been at the peak selling point. This is the bottom of the market from a price standpoint. And then from this point forward, we've been in recovery mode. Both home sales and median prices have risen. And you'll see that the home sales is the red line is much more jagged because home sales are seasonal. Most home closings are the month of March through the month of August. So that would represent the peak. And then September through February represents the valley. So what's different this time around? First of all, we have low interest rates, but we don't have easy credit. It's still not easy. Interest rates are actually substantially lower than they were during the bubble days, but it's not necessarily easy to get a loan now. You still have to qualify. You can't lie about your income or just have what they call it a stated income. You just write down, oh, I make $500,000 a year, and they would loan you based on that. That's why they call them liar loans. Today's buyer is typically not a speculator at all. Today's buyer is an end user buyer. They're either buying a home or building a home to live in, or they're buying or building a home to put into a rental program. But the rental program is, it's not a short-term, I don't want to confuse the term short-term rentals, because it could be, people are building homes and putting them into an Airbnb type of environment. So they're short-term rentals, but the owner is planning to own it for a long time. So whether you're going to move into it and live in it, or whether you're going to hang on to it and rent it either short or long term, you are an end user. And we have real demand with a steady stream of newcomers. And the steady stream of newcomers is being driven by three factors right now, I think. And you've probably read about them or heard about them in the news. A couple of years ago, we had a change in the tax law, which substantially reduced the amount of deductions a person could take on their personal income tax for real estate taxes or state income taxes. Well, Florida, as you know, has no state income tax, but a lot of the states up north, particularly the Northeast corridor and upper Midwest, have high state income taxes, and they also have relatively high real estate taxes. So that change in the tax law started pushing people to move to what I call lower tax states, which tend to be in the South. And that's really been going on for a couple of years. We actually had a strong very strong real estate market going into the pandemic. But then the pandemic itself has added more momentum to our incoming residents, because the pandemic, from a death rate standpoint, the states that have suffered most, the most significant death rates are, surprisingly, not surprisingly, some of the same states that have the highest taxes. And they also had more of the, let's call it civil disobedience instead of riots. But people are driven by, these are basic instincts. You obviously economics and taxes, that's pretty visceral. Healthcare, your health and safety are very visceral. So the COVID combined with the civil disobedience is continuing to drive more people to the suburbs generally and to states further south. Another factor is you can work from home now. People are finding out that working from home does work. It's more efficient. And so, I mean, I moved to Florida because I was, at the time when I moved to Florida, I was a regional sales manager, Southeast region, for a technology company. And they said, you can live wherever you want as long as you're near an airport. And I was working from home at the time also. Our economy is diversifying. It's not just construction, hospitality anymore. The healthcare, we've had some huge announcements this last year. And I want to tell you that we will look back on last year as being a bellwether year for Flagler County and Palm Coast. Multifamily construction is coming back. And I know that there's if you go back and look at the earlier slide when I was talking about our demographics, those same demographics probably lead to a higher, I would call it a NIMBY quotient than some areas have. So we have I think, a greater than normal aversion to housing that isn't just like what we live in. But multifamily is coming back, town centers coming back. It's been kind of re-envisioned. And a lot of the multifamily that is coming back is starting there. But some benchmarks just since June, and these are, to me, this is incredible. The number of MLS single family active listings fell below 700 for the first time, and that was in June. And I've been watching this market for 15 years, and we've always had more than 700 active listings, single family listings in the MLS system. But we dropped below 700 for the first time, then just 6 weeks later dropped below 600. And since this last weekend, we went down below 300. This morning we were at 287, I think. We have just a sliver of our existing, we have over 50,000 housing units in our county. So when you think of what percentage is 300 of, it's way less than 1% of our housing inventory is for sale right now. Pending listings, which should be less than half of active listings, is actually double the number of active listings. We're up to 700 or approaching 700. That's the highest it's ever been. Number of pending listings is usually down in the 350 range. So these are unseen, unheard of numbers. Pending listings exceeding active listings in all three categories. That's homes, lots, and condos. So it's not just a fluke with homes. There are nearly 2 pending home listings for every active home listing. And I just throw in as an aside, there are almost 5 realtors for every active listing too. We could staff an open house at every listing 7 days a week if every realtor would agree to work 5 days a week and let me do the scheduling. So put on your seatbelt. We are really on a roll. This is not short term. This recovery is going to continue. The the three trends I talked about, healthcare, safety, taxes, those are not going to change quickly. And once the momentum has started, it's going to continue. So even if the economy falters in other parts of the country, we may see a slowing down, but I'm very, very bullish. I think that I think we learned some things from mistakes we might have made early on. One of the mistakes that we've made is we've allowed too much reliance on residential for our tax base. I think and that's why I'm so glad to see the healthcare industry come in, because the healthcare industry will create ancillary businesses, lots of spin-offs, and that's all good. Now, hopefully some people have some questions. If you want to jot down, you can get a hold of me, Toby Tobin, toby@gotoby.com, 386-931-7124. Email me or call me anytime.